Number 15. Weezer bassist sees his future. Mikey Welsh was the bassist for the famous rock group Weezer until he left them in 2001. For 10 years, the solo artist played in various side projects and also painted while dealing with some personal issues. Then, on the 26th of September 2011, he made a disturbing post on Twitter out of nowhere. "Dreamt I died in Chicago next weekend," Mikey wrote. "Heart attack in my sleep." A little while later, he realizes he made a mistake about his death date and adds, "Correction, the weekend after the next." The dream startles him enough to start writing his will that very same day. The day before his premonition, he made another Twitter post about one of his paintings that was up for sale. He writes that it's currently going for $250, but adds that the price could increase, quote, "if I expire prematurely," end quote. It just seemed like a harmless joke, and no one thought much of it. But on October 9th, 2011, the dream took on a whole new meaning after a cleaning crew found Mikey Welsh laying on the floor of his hotel room in Chicago. Pills and heroin were in the room with him. While some Weezer fans believe that he had been plotting his own suicide for some time, others point out that he was still making art and had future plans. It's hard to tell if Mikey overdosed on purpose or if fate gave him a psychic vision of a drug-induced heart attack shortly before it happened. Number 14. ARPANET. In 1975, a news reporter named Ton Schultz ran an article in the Washington Monthly about a government project called ARPANET. This was basically a very early version of the internet, and the first time that government computers could network with each other to share information. Even though ARPA officials said that the network was only used for military and science data, and never for domestic surveillance, Tom wasn't so sure that that would always be the case. By the end of the article, he makes a startling prediction that most certainly has come true in recent years. Tom asks readers if a future president could eventually, quote, "order ARPANET to be used as a police instrument." He even goes on to write that ARPANET could be one day, quote, "instantly telling every government agency everything there is to know about every American citizen." This simple, hypothetical question probably was overlooked in the 1970s, a time period where such a concept was hard to believe. Skip ahead to 2016 though, and this prediction is exactly where it's at. Everybody's web history, purchasing habits, and other sensitive personal information are all being captured in large databases for the government to sift through at their leisure. It looks like Tom Schultz was right after all. Number 13. Abraham Lincoln. Ward Hill Layman was a bodyguard of Abraham Lincoln, as well as his personal friend. After the president was assassinated, Ward wrote a book called Recollections of Abraham Lincoln. In it, Ward tells of a strange dream that Lincoln once shared with him. Lincoln described being surrounded by a heavy stillness. After a while, you could hear muffled cries from far away. The president leaves his bedroom and wanders around his house, looking for the source of the sobs, but it becomes quiet again, and he hears nothing. Then, he hears crying again, farther away this time. He follows the crying deeper into the house until he comes across a large room. He sees a corpse in funeral clothes resting on a raised podium. Soldiers are posted all around the body, and there is a long line of mourners to view the deceased man. "Who is dead in the White House?" asks Lincoln to one of the guards. "The president," the guard answers. "He was killed by an assassin." As soon as the guard says these words, the crowd wails and shrieks with horror. Their rising screams grow so deafening that it causes Lincoln to jump up from his own bed. If what Ward says is true, then Lincoln dreamed of his own death shortly before being shot at the opera. Number 12. Psychic student. In the New Utrecht High School in Brooklyn, New York, an English teacher named Antoinette Di Lorenzo was watching over her class while they had some free time. She overheard two classmates having a conversation. One pointed out the window at the World Trade Center and said, You see those two buildings? They won't be standing there next week. After the terrorist attacks, Antoinette waited until September 13th to report what she overheard to the police. The FBI came in and quickly put her classroom on lockdown for 3 hours while they interrogated the boy who had made the psychic claim. As the boy's father later pointed out, all his child had done was make a prediction that turned out to be true. Since this wasn't illegal, the FBI couldn't do anything about it and let it go. How did this child know that the World Trade Center was going to go down within a week? His older brother says that he was just kidding around, and the FBI isn't saying anything at all. Until they declassify more information, a psychic explanation remains as good as any. Number 11. Jan Cockcray. Last year, on March 24th, 27-year-old Andreas Lubitz was co-piloting a plane as it flew over the French Alps. When the main pilot excused himself to use the restroom, Andreas locked the cockpit doors and put the plane on a new course straight into the side of the mountain. The pilot first pleaded with Andreas from the other side of the door, and then attempted to smash his way in with an axe, but it was no use. All 150 passengers died screaming. An investigation revealed that Andreas had recently gone into treatment for eye problems. Many suspect that he was worried that these eye problems would threaten his career as a pilot and chose to kill himself before this could happen. Records show that he had a history of mental disorders and previous suicide attempts that he hid from his employers. As if this wasn't scary enough, just 2 months before, a Dutch pilot named Jan Cockcray wrote a chilling column that highlights this very same issue. The column appears in Pilot and Plane magazine, and it discusses the vulnerabilities of a new security system that was put into place to prevent hijackings. I hope I never find myself in the situation where I go to the toilet and return to find a cockpit door that won't open, is exactly what Jan wrote. He went on to explain, I seriously sometimes wonder who's sitting next to me in the cockpit. How can I be sure that I can trust him? Perhaps something terrible has just happened in his life and he's unable to overcome it. Number 10. Baba Vanga. Baba Vanga was a blind prophet born in modern-day Bulgaria in 1911. When she was only 12 years old, a strong gust of wind blew her down and pinned her to the ground. Sand scratched against her eyes over and over again. By the time the wind had passed, she was totally blind. Yet, it seemed she could still see more than anyone around her. In 1989, she said that, quote, "The American brethren will fall after being attacked by the steel birds." While it's obvious what she meant by steel birds, many think the phrase American brethren is a clever reference to the Twin Towers. Baba Vanga also said that the wolves will be howling in a bush and innocent blood will be gushing after the attack. Her followers find her use of the word bush to be especially interesting, considering that George W. Bush was president at the time. Keep in mind, this prediction was made in the late 80s. It would be a long time before George W. Bush would take office. This isn't the only famous national travesty that Baba Vanga predicted well ahead of her time. In 1980, she said that, in August of 1999 or 2000, Kursk will be covered with water. Just as she said, a Russian submarine named the Kursk was lost at sea in August of 2000. Over 100 sailors died. Number 9. Jeffrey R. Palmer. Jeffrey R. Palmer is an Australian psychic who makes a lot of predictions each and every year. In 2005, he made 3 startlingly accurate predictions that have left people scratching their heads in disbelief. The odds of him correctly guessing one of these dates and statistics is practically impossible, let alone getting 3 predictions correct in the same year. Jeffrey, for instance, said that on August 28th, a devastating hurricane would hit the southern United States. That year, Hurricane Katrina ripped through New Orleans and devastated many other areas in the south. The hurricane started on August 23rd and lasted until August 31st. Jeffrey's August 28th prediction falls exactly in the middle of this time period. Jeffrey also successfully predicted gas and oil prices for the year of 2005. He said that gold would reach $500 per ounce by the end of 2005, and sure enough, gold hit $513 per ounce. He said that gasoline prices would reach $3 per gallon, and they topped out at $2.95 that year. As if this weren't enough, the year before that, he accurately foresaw a 2004 volcanic eruption in the Indian Ocean. He also called the tsunamis in Indonesia that same year. Number 8. Baba Vanga. Again. The Russian blind prophet claimed to encounter invisible creatures who would talk to her and tell her secrets about the future. They could also speak with the dead. Baba Vanga died in 1996 at the age of 85, but not before making psychic predictions that were mostly accurate. The blind psychic predicted 9/11 and the Kursk submarine, and she seemed especially good at detecting natural disasters too. She described the 2004 tsunami as a huge wave that would crash over a big coast, covering people and towns and causing everything to disappear under the water. She also predicted that nuclear fallout would blanket the northern hemisphere of the world by the year 2011. This was the same year when the Japanese city of Fukushima experienced an earthquake that devastated their nuclear power sites. A 2013 report from an international commission confirmed that the radiation had indeed spread throughout the northern hemisphere, just as predicted. Still, it has to be said that even though Baba Vanga predicted a gigantic nuclear cloud that would kill almost everything, it actually only showed up trace amounts of radiation. Still, even if she overestimated the severity, Baba Vanga was still absolutely correct about a huge nuclear disaster in 2011. Number 7. Rasputin. In the early 1900s, Rasputin was a powerful psychic advisor for Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. He won over the Tsar's trust by using his mystical powers to control his daughter's hemophilia, a rare disease which prevents blood from clotting and causes excessive bleeding. After Rasputin was able to keep the Tsar's daughter from dying of blood loss, the family accepted his counsel on all matters without hesitation. Rasputin made many predictions during his stay with the royal family, and many of them came true. Rasputin predicted that, after a horrible war, there will come a time when money will have no value. During this economic crisis, money will be made of iron, and gold shall become so valuable that for a few gold coins a small farm can be bought. In 1929, the stock market crashes less than a decade after World War I. This is the horrible war which he spoke of. During this time, money loses almost all of its value and is mostly made from iron alloys. While this is happening, the gold market rises steadily and becomes one of the only trusted forms of currency. It seems as though Rasputin had correctly predicted the events leading up to the Great Depression well in advance. Number 6. Nostradamus. Nostradamus is one of the history's most famous dark prophets of all time. He lived in the 1500s in France and helped treat victims during the bubonic plague outbreak. While most doctors were ineffectively treating plague victims with garlic, mercury, and by cutting them open, thinking that they could bleed the plague out, Nostradamus was one of the only doctors who instead used low-fat diets, fresh air, and proper hygiene to keep his patients clean and help them actually recover. The young physician was always a little ahead of the rest, and this was even before he started practicing occult rituals in order to see into the future. The church soon charged him with heresy after he made a sarcastic remark about religion that was overheard by the wrong person. Rather than sticking around to be imprisoned and tortured, Nostradamus instead fled the country. He spent most of his forced vacation traveling to ancient schools throughout Italy, Greece and Turkey, where he learned all there was to know about the occult from practitioners of dark magic. When he returned to his home country 9 years later, he was a completely changed man. Sure, he still helped plague victims like before, but he would perform strange rituals during his private time. At night, he would meditate himself into a deep trance while sitting in front of a bowl of water and mystic herbs. Strange and violent psychic visions would come to him in a flash, and he would write them down in a journal that he kept nearby. Nostradamus knew that he had to get these important prophecies out to the public somehow, but he also knew that the church would come looking for him again if they figured out that he was using dark magic to see into the future. He wrote the predictions down as riddle-like poems as a way to keep their true meaning secret from those who wished him harm. A lot of these predictions came true. Take this one for example. From the depths of the west of Europe, a young child will be born of poor people. He who by tongue will seduce a great troop. His fame will increase toward the realm of the East. All of this came true. In 1889, a future dictator is born in Western Europe. He would use his excellent speaking skills to deceive many people and to raise an army. Eventually, he would ally with Japan, the Kingdom of the East. Of course, Nostradamus was talking about Hitler. If this isn't enough to convince you, then Nostradamus also had a passage about the fall of Hitler too. Beasts ferocious with hunger will cross the river. The greater part of the battlefield will be against Hitler. Here, the beasts ferocious with hunger that will cross the rivers is Hitler's Panzer Tiger tanks. As for Hitler, many people think that Nostradamus meant to say Hitler and was off by one letter, but that's not it. The Latin word for the Danube River is Hister. This is also coincidentally where Hitler was born. Number 5. Rasputin and Cairo. The most shocking prediction Rasputin ever had made was about his own death. Towards the end of 1916, Rasputin began to sense that his own death was near almost all of the time. Finally, he knew that he was going to die on New Year's Day, 1917. He told the royal family that if he was killed by peasants, then their lineage would be okay. If it was Russian princes that killed him, however, then the royal family should likewise consider themselves dead within 2 years. This prediction was made at around the same time when Rasputin and the Tsar went to visit another famous psychic called Cairo. When they arrived, Cairo asked to read Rasputin's palm. Rasputin asked about his own future, at which point Cairo said that he shall be attacked by poison, by knife and by bullet. Cairo said he also saw Rasputin's body in the Neva River. Later that year, Rasputin was killed on December 30th, 1916, exactly 1 day before he predicted. A gang of Russian princes first tried to poison him, but when the poison had no effect, they shot and stabbed him multiple times. According to Cairo, the attackers went back to Rasputin 2 days later and were amazed to find that he was still breathing. At that point, they tossed him into the Neva River. A year and a half later, the Tsar and his family are taken into their basement and executed during a violent revolution. This is perhaps the first time where 2 different psychic predictions merge to reveal the truth. Number 4. Nostradamus predicted 9/11. He writes that the sky will burn at 45 degrees latitude, meaning that a great fire will leap up into the sky. This could also refer to the latitude of New York City, though the exact measurements are slightly off. He goes on to write how fire approaches the great new city, which many take as a direct reference to New York. This prediction caused quite a stir after 9/11 and went into wide circulation. There was a famous chain email that added lines about 2 steel birds and 2 brothers torn apart by chaos, but this was never actually written in the original prophecy. To be honest, the original lines are already creepy enough without anything else added to them. Number 3. The Wealthy Welshman. A lot of people say that if they were psychic, the first thing they would do is get a lottery ticket. Well, a Welshman once won a bet that was so improbable that only a psychic could have dreamed it up. In 1989, he read a magazine article that listed the likelihood of certain events happening over the course of the next 10 years, and gave the odds. The article gave him an idea. He went to a British gambling company named Ladbrokes, showed them the article, and picked just 5 of the events to bet on. The odds of him winning were 6,479 to 1, but he only bet for £30. The man predicted that within the next 10 years, the pop star Cliff Richard would be knighted, the band U2 would not break up, and that 3 very specific soap operas would remain on the air. Imagine Ladbrokes' surprise when all of these events happened exactly as the man had predicted, and they now owed him more than £19,000. Number 2. Nostradamus Part 3. In 1559, a large jousting tournament was held in Paris in celebration of a peace treaty between France and Spain. Among the contestants were King Henry II of France. The king was doing quite well against the competition until he had to joust the Count of Montgomery. The count nearly took the king off of his horse, and the King Henry demanded a second try. This time, the jousting lance fatally stabbed the king through his eye, straight into the brain. Nobody could have predicted this fatal accident. Except, of course, for Nostradamus. On the field of combat in a single battle, he wrote years ago, he will pierce his eye through a golden cage. As it so happens, the king was wearing a golden helmet at the time, and the lance went between his visor. 2 wounds made 1, Nostradamus writes, then he dies a cruel death. Just as predicted, the lance went into the eye and splintered into the king's brain. 2 wounds were indeed made into 1, and of course, it was a particularly cruel death. The first line of the prophecy, however, is perhaps the most chilling of all. The young lion will overcome the older one, he predicts. As it turned out, both King Henry and the Count of Montgomery had lions on their shields. Number 1. Tanahoy. Tanahoy is a spiritual communicator who claims to see and hear ghosts. On April 19, 1995, he was doing an interview with a North Carolina radio station called WQSM. The psychic said that he personally knew that there would be a terrorist attack within the country that year, and that he was sure that it would be a federal building that would get hit. Not even 2 hours later, domestic terrorist Timothy McVeigh packs a rental truck full of homemade explosives and drives to the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in the capital of Oklahoma. 168 people are killed in the explosion, and Tanahoy is flooded with phone calls and media attention. According to an interview in the local paper, Tana had this premonition as far back as January, but he didn't think the FBI would believe him. Hello everyone, and thanks for watching yet another video. I know it's been quite a while since you've last seen me, but trust me, this won't be the last. So I've had a lot of people join me on my YouTube channel, which I'm really happy about. You can find the link to that in the description. But do you know I also have a Twitter account that I use a lot? Come over there, chat with me. I might even ask some questions there, maybe some ideas for future videos. I don't know, just share them with me. I'd love to hear. You can follow me @SirAim on Twitter. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.